Have you ever held your breath before releasing a new product over a certain historical topic? Or you want to create resources about a certain culture or a certain time or a certain event, but you want to do it without ending up on the news? Like, you want to have culturally responsive resources. You want to create resources that are inclusive, but you don't want to be roasted inside of wallflowers or have your reputation drug through the mud because you messed something up simply because you just didn't know. Well, today's guest, Karen Au Haq, is going to be talking all about that. She is an expert and works with a team of experts to help create resources that are culturally responsive and accurate. And she's going to be talking about some ways that you can do that with your resources. And one of the things that I love about Karen and why I really wanted to bring her on the show was that Karen offers a service to teacher authors and to the education community that I didn't even know was available until I met her. And so if you fall into this category where you feel a little unsure of yourself with some of these resources that you're creating or with resources that you would like to create, this episode is for you, because I've had people come to me multiple times and say, is this okay? Is this okay? And honestly, I don't know. I'm not the person to ask. And so I wanted to bring an expert in to be able to answer some of those questions for you. Now, I want to mention that we may talk about TPT's guidelines, and TPT has seriously revised their guidelines since the recording. They are now no longer anywhere near as strict with their guidelines, but that obviously doesn't mean that we don't need to be as diligent when we're creating our resources. So here we go. I want you guys to meet Karen. Hey, Karen, how are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here, and I really appreciate the chance that you're giving me to have a chat with you about all things in my TPT business and everything.
Listen, I'm so excited to have you because what you're talking about today is so far outside of my area of expertise, but it's something that I get questions about quite often. And whenever somebody asks me a question about, is this appropriate or is that appropriate for my TPT resource? I am so not the person to be asking about this. So
Which
I'm
is really
so
humble of
excited.
you. I appreciate that a lot.
Well, it's true. It's very true. So, can you start us off by just telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and kind of tell us what we're going to be talking about today?
Of course, the business itself, Ed Coach Network, creates and supports the creation of culturally responsive and accurate teaching resources. Specifically in the teacherpreneur world, we do that by supporting those who create social studies and cultural or themed resources, and particularly those who want help getting it right in a judgment-free zone. We also support two other groups of people, like educators who are feeling isolated in their DEI work and just want a community of people who get it, and then also classroom teachers who are concerned about problematic resources and aren't sure where to start honoring their students' lived experiences. So that's the business in a nutshell. My origin story. Growing up, none of the people in power nor the leaders in my community looked like me. And now, as a teacher myself, I am still a teacher, and this side business is a side business for me, passion project of mine. None of my direct supervisors have ever looked like me. Very few of my colleagues are members of the East Asian or even just the Asian diaspora. Even fewer are Black or self-ID'd Indigenous people in Canada and the US. I'm based in Canada, but a lot of my clients tend to be in the US. So I know in my bones that as a child of immigrants, I'm not the only one who has had to code switch, stealth, minimize who I am in order to fit into a place not made for people like me. As a result of this lack of real representation, I'm painfully aware that many of our system's educational training and resources are insanely problematic. I'm not the only one who recognizes either. Like, I'm sure you're aware of that. I'm sure your colleagues are aware of that, simply because people writing them don't know what they don't know and don't always properly consult with real communities for a ton of reasons. And then I saw the same issues reflected in the TPT world when I joined it. I have my own little store. I don't invest too much time into it. I don't have as much time as I would like to invest in it. But whatever I do, and I'm part of a lot of the community groups that are part of the TPT world. And then as I create my own resources, and as I also do some copywriting for other TPT authors, I did see the bigger societal issues being reflected in the TPT world as well. So I founded Ed Coach Network. I've created a judgment-free zone for people who, like me, want to learn, unpack their biases, and make things right.
So I love this because there were so many things that you just said in there, but a couple of the things that really stood out to me were you have a service for teacher authors, for anybody who creates resources, to give them a space to go to that's judgment free, but to lend your expertise and the expertise of the people that you collaborate and team up with, to lend them your expertise so that they can create resources that are appropriate and resources that are accurate, which I think is something that we all want to do. We all want our resources to be appropriate. We all want them to be accurate. We want to be aware, and we want to make sure that our resources are not negatively impacting students, but we want them to also be like positively impacting students. Like we want students to read about their own cultures and not just read about it from someone who didn't live in that culture, but like read about it from the perspective of hopefully someone who has lived in that culture, who has experienced some of that. I teach math, and you're like, that's all I know. So when we step into anything, social studies, history, anything like that, I have literally no clue. And I imagine that there are a lot of people who feel the same way who come to you. Do you see that a lot?
Yeah, I do. And it's always nice to encounter people who are willing to learn. Before I move on though, Lauren, I do want to emphasize one thing. I'm the face of this community and I'm the face of the network, Ed Coach Network. I know my way around DEI work, but I'm by no means the sole expert. And you did touch on the fact that I lean on my community and my consultants to help out with this business. Our community members are the real experts here, and I lean on them all the time for consultation. So while I founded this company, I'm not going to come out and say that I'm the expert of every single culture out there, because there's no way.
Right. Yeah.
The East Asian culture is seeped with anti-Black racism. It's seeped with the impacts of colonialism. So I have to do this as a team. There's no way I can do it on my own. Our diversity, equity, and inclusion work cannot just come from my one perspective. I'm just one person, and like anyone else, I'm riddled with my own biases and lack of knowing, and that's why we're a network. It's not about me, it's about the whole community.
And when I first found out about your service, I honestly didn't know that anything like this existed. I assumed that there had to be something like that for teacher authors, but I was not aware. Like if I were going to create a resource and it had anything to do with history or social studies or any kind of event, I would have had no clue who to go to. Like not at all. So I was so excited when I met you and I thought, okay, this is somebody that I would love to introduce to the teacher author community, because I know that there are many teacher authors who already work with you, but there are, again, a lot of people in my space who are asking me questions that I don't have the answers to. Let's just start with kind of unpacking some basics.
Yeah, let's do it.
What are some common problems that you see on a regular basis when you're auditing work?
There's so much prefacing, because I don't ever want anyone to take me the wrong way, because everyone comes with their own perceptions of what I'm saying. Like what I'm saying, depending on where people come from, they'll interpret what I'm saying differently. So I'm going to preface this and make sure it's clear that before I answer that question, I want to say that I was apprehensive about answering this publicly, because I get backlash all the time from people who shoot back with, it's not a big deal. People can get defensive when their work is critiqued. People sometimes will take things the wrong way. So I'm really grateful for the teacher authors that I've worked with. We figure out together. So my answer to that comes from a place of non-judgment. None of this is personal. People who are listening, you will probably think, oh, I've done that. Oh yeah, I've done that. Oh, I've done that. You're going to see yourself in this. I've seen myself in these answers. We just hope that people are open and willing to do their best. Okay, so to start, the easiest thing, the most visible thing is the clip art. A lot of the clip art, there's this very trendy clip art that is very popular right now, and it infantilizes important historical figures, civil rights icons, and revered heroes, which is a big problem. So there's that. And some of it is very stereotypical, paints a culture with a broad brush. I can give lots of examples. It's just generally inaccurate. So some of the inaccuracies, one of them is by omission. So for example, saying settlers instead of colonizers. And this is a fairly new approach to thinking about the settlers who came to North America and colonized the space. They weren't settlers, they were colonizers. Canada was a colony. United States were the 13 colonies. They were colonies. And by saying settlers, it waters down the violence that actually happens when North America was purposefully colonized. And going back to clip art with like the cutesy clip art, or even just painting a culture with a broad brush, one thing that I see and I notice, especially around Lunar New Year time, is that Lunar New Year is talked about like Chinese New Year as if they're synonymous, but they're not. Mm-hmm. Or the resources, it's only Chinese New Year that's talked about, even though Lunar New Year is celebrated around the same time by Korean people, by Vietnamese people, and they all have their own very different celebrations. Like in Vietnam, it's called Tet. It's not even called Lunar New Year. You'll see that a lot of celebrations will overlap because of the immigration of Chinese people from different places, but they all still have their own celebrations. So that's like by omission, that would be a misrepresentation or an inaccuracy.
Clip art is a
Yeah.
great place to start. We're talking about making sure that you're using clip art that isn't infantilizing, I think is what you said. Infantilizing? Yeah.
Infantilizing. So
Infantilizing.
yeah,
That's a new word for me, but basically like making them look like small children
it
when
undermines the
they're
seriousness of the issues that are being
right.
discussed. So another thing would be tied to that is misrepresentation. And I understand that a lot of primary resource creators, they need to create resources that match their target audience. So I understand where it comes from. At the same time, with that misrepresentation or watering down of the issues, suddenly children grow up thinking that Martin Luther King wanted black and white children to play together. Everyone watching this, read his letters from Birmingham jail. It outlines his purpose of why he protested, why he does what he does, why he was
Yeah.
arrested. And I helped a teacher author write her K-1 resource about Martin Luther King for Black History Month. And we were able to craft it with language so that it is appropriate for the age. And I was also able to help her find clip art that was appropriate for that age and yet still taught about historical figures in a way that was culturally responsive and responsible.
So it's totally possible to choose age appropriate clip art, but it's also possible to teach a topic at an age appropriate level while still being honest and not trivializing what was taking place at that time.
Yes.
So that is, these are like three very basic things. But I think that there was so much in there that you were talking about. What struck me is like you're saying there's a difference between Chinese New Year and Lunar New Year. And a lot of people don't understand that those two are different events.
Lunar New Year is the broad that it's like that time of year. And then you've got a lot of different cultures who celebrate it in their own way. So Chinese New Year is very specific. There are specific traditions to Chinese New Year. There are very specific traditions to New Year in Korea. The clip art for Lunar New Year always features the red envelope, but Koreans don't give out those red envelopes. They just hand out a white envelope. In China, if you give a white envelope, it's only for funerals. So these little nuances that it's not possible to know unless you ask or have your work audited and like there's no clip art out there that's representative of Lunar New Year in all of it.
And what you just said is exactly what was hitting home to me when you were talking earlier is like, these are things that you wouldn't know unless you asked somebody. And to me, it just makes really good sense that if you're going to write about a cultural event, that you would at least consult with somebody who lives within that culture or is a part of that community. Asking questions and taking the time to talk to somebody who's a part of that community is just kind of something that's left by the wayside.
And knowing who to ask too, because when my client came to me about celebrations around the world, and Lunar New Year was one of them, I had knowledge gaps because I'm from the East Asian diaspora. I didn't grow up in East Asia. So there was a lot about the various traditions of that New Year that I didn't know. And I had to go to my network and ask them. Again, there's no shame in not knowing. Like, I celebrate Chinese New Year and there was a lot that I didn't know until I asked. So
can you give us 3 things that we should think about or 3 tips when we're creating resources that would help ensure that we're creating resources that are appropriate?
I'm going to be frank when I answer this question. And the first one is more of a philosophical answer. So the first question I was asked is, why are you creating the resource? Is it to make money? Of course, we're on TPT. It's a business. We're going to make money. And I can appreciate that. But if that's the sole purpose for creating the resource, don't do it. Just don't. We don't get to profit off of people's cultures without the intention to serve or give back. Some people will bristle over this, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's unethical to do it. If the purpose is just to make profit and you don't do your due diligence and you don't ask questions, then you're profiting off of someone else's culture without giving back in a meaningful way. If it's equally important that you create the resource in order to serve your community, again, like you said, you have a student who is in your class and you would like resources that will represent them, but you're not quite happy with the resources that are already out there. You're creating it to serve, and that's amazing. So then do it right and also find a way to give back to the community that you're writing about. So a perfect thing that resonated with me, I did an Indigenous education liaison professional development thing with my district a couple weeks ago. And our Indigenous education consultant is writing a book that is meant to support East Asian students She sees the need and she's making sure to do it right by writing it in full partnership with someone else who does DEI work and is also an East Asian woman. So yes, do it if there's a need in your community. Just make sure never about us without us.
I love what you're saying. Like, don't write about us without us. It's not really a big ask to at least consult with them.
And that leads to the second point, or second thing is, can we truly position ourselves as the expert on people's histories, cultures, and lived experiences without consulting the very people we're creating resources about? A lot of people say they did their research and so it's fine. But then one of the other things that I would caution is that some of the research out there is not right, or it's not reflective of lived experiences. An example is that I did some research on Las Posadas, and I wrote up a piece and then I sent it to my friend who is Mexican. She looked at it and said, this is all historically accurate, but we don't celebrate it like this anymore. So if I had published the piece the way it was, a kid who is Mexican American or Mexican Canadian reading it would be like, yes, I guess, but no one does this anymore. Like, can you imagine? This is the thing to think about. Like, can we truly position ourselves? So we're creating resources that teachers and students will take as factual, right? Like when people buy your resource, they're going to look at it and say, okay, this is fact. Students will take it as fact. So when they're buying our resources, we're positioning ourselves as the experts. So we can't really take that lightly. It's a big responsibility. And if the thought of that brings discomfort, lean into it and figure out how to rise to the responsibility of doing it right.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. So let's talk about this, because you and I have had a conversation before where, we were having a discussion and you told me about how much the cost is to hire a consultant like yourself. And obviously you can't speak for anybody else's prices. Like, I understand that. But I was honestly kind of shocked because especially when you're brand new to the TPT world, there are some upfront costs. And when you're a teacher, then you probably don't really have a lot. Like most teachers don't have a lot of extra. Like you don't have a lot of extra money to invest. So what do you do if you're a history teacher? Like you can't create any history resources without hiring someone to help you do this.
If you wanted someone to look at your resource, we charge $60 an hour. So for $60, we can look at your resource and give you suggestions. Like we would do the fact checking, we would provide suggestions for changes. Within an hour, we can do quite a bit. So there's that. But that aside, if you are accessing some secondary resources, then some questions could be, are the resources used in your research written by, in collaboration with, or in consultation with the communities in question? So don't just pick an article that you read. Who wrote that article? Where did that person get their research from? Did they partner with someone who is also within that community? Another thing to think about is, do the sources value people's lived experiences, or is it merely statistical in nature? So one of the issues that I've seen is if it's statistical in nature, then the tone of the resource ends up being appropriate. Like for example, I audited a Holocaust resource and it presented the atrocities factually and without sensitivity to all the horrors that were faced by the Jewish people during the Holocaust. So one of the suggestions that my consultant provided was to remind the author that this genocide happened to her family. Staff and students have families and friends who actually face the trauma and are still learning to cope with the horrors. So what does that mean? What does that look like? What would the impact be with a resource that is so unfeeling towards their lived experiences? So again, is the resource that you're reading written in that way, or does it value people's lived experiences? And so when you're creating, also think about that as well. And is there nuance, or does the source paint the culture with a broad brush and explain traditions like Lunar New Year? Does it explain traditions as though there's no regional differences? So that's for secondary resources. And then for the primary one, if again, you're creating a resource about the Holocaust and you have a friend who happens to be Jewish, what lens do they speak from? What lens are they in education? How long have they been in education? What grade level? And do they have the deep knowledge about the Holocaust in order to support you creating the resource? Because, yes, the Jewish community understands what went on, but not everyone is a scholar. So just, again, things to think about as you're doing your research.
Okay, so I love that you've given some tools and some things to look at when you're first starting. Would I be incorrect in saying that maybe it would be okay to start creating resources, but it doesn't have to be resources about other cultures first?
If you are a social studies teacher, I don't know what the qualifications are in order to become a social studies teacher. And I guess it depends on the district. in elementary school, you don't need a specialization at all. So yes, I agree that reach for the resources that are like a lower hanging fruit first, like reading passages or companion activities for another text, and that's allowed. So
Yeah.
that could be a really great place to start. If you come from a place of service, then the community will come together and support you. That's been
I love
my
that.
experience anyway. So
I love that. So you kind of mentioned earlier that your cost is $60 an hour and that you can, accomplish quite a bit
yeah,
within an hour. And I was shocked
a lot.
because I honestly, in my head, I imagined that it would be much more than that. Like I really did. Like, and I'm sure that prices range, and that's not to say that, a few weeks from now you don't go up on your prices. But when you factor in like how much you sell a resource for, let's like say you're selling this resource for $5, after you sold 12 of them, you've made back that initial
You
investment,
have, yeah.
and so it's very minimal when you think about how long this resource is going to get to be on the market.
Yeah.
And of course, like absolutely, priority number one is making sure that your resource is appropriate for students and for use in the classroom. But as a business owner, you really do not want this resource to wind up on the news. I mean, I think that would
Yeah.
literally be like when
Oh my
I think
gosh.
about, the worst thing that could possibly happen would be to like wake up one morning, turn on the news. Not that I do that because that's depressing, but like turn on the news and like there's my resource like sitting right there. And now it's like I made a horrible mistake. And everyone's calling for like, my store to be shut down. People are boycotting me. Nobody wants to go through that. And it's like such a small thing that you can do and just a small amount of money that you can invest in the very beginning if you're creating social studies resources or resources about other cultures.
Yeah.
So I love that this is something that to me seems very affordable and seems like a no-brainer. Like
And
this seems like such a
the
no-brainer.
way we priced it too, because I don't know of anyone else who provides this service to TPT authors or teacher resource sellers. There are a lot of people who do equity work and a lot of people who do consulting within the school system, but I'm not familiar with anyone else who does this for TPT authors. And if you're out there, contact me. I would love to touch base with you.
Yeah.
But that's why we priced it where it is, because it's such a new concept for people. And like, as you said, who's to say a month from now or like half a year from now, the pricing will be different because of demand or because people see the need. But we're trying to keep it affordable so that the entry point isn't so scary for people, and also like so that we can at least have our costs covered. And that's kind of where we're at right now. Like I said, I'm a classroom teacher, and this is a bit of a passion project of mine. So the pricing reflects that a little bit.
Well, thank you so much for coming here and for sharing your ideas, your opinions, for sharing all of your expertise and your knowledge on this topic. Because my hope is that someone who's listening right now, who's been creating resources or has been thinking about creating resources and has felt that hesitancy to put it out there because they feel like they're doing everything, like they're doing their due diligence, they're doing everything that they know to do, but they didn't know that a service like what you offer exists where they can pay somebody to come and look at their resource and it be judgment free, because that would be one of my fears. My hope is that somebody who's listening is like, you know what? I didn't know this was an option. I feel so relieved that this is an option. And I think that there are going to be so many people when they hear this episode and they find out that a service like this exists. And I did my research. Karen gave me some references, and I contacted one of her former clients. I happened to know them, and I contacted her, and she like sang your praises. She literally said that you were so professional, that you gave her so much help, so much support, and made incredibly practical, helpful suggestions for her, and that she didn't feel at all judged. It was exactly like what you said, like judgment-free zone. She didn't feel at all judged, and that she felt like it was worth every penny that she spent to know that she had the peace of mind when she put it out there, that it was a resource that was accurate, it was a resource that was appropriate, and that it was going to be a very high quality resource to put into the hands of teachers and students. And I think that there are a lot of people who would just like fall all over themselves. Like they're gonna be so excited when they find out about you. So
and I understand where the nervousness comes into. Even for myself, doing DEI work, there's a lot of polarizing energy out there, and a lot of people, because of the nature of being anonymous online, knee-jerk reactions when if you really dug deep, a lot of people just, you watch all of that kind of polarizing conversation happen back and forth, and then you just get scared to even ask the question. And we're trying to eliminate all of that. Like, do I get frustrated when I see things? Of course, I'm human. But at the same time, I also understand. And so we do come from an understanding perspective. And as I mentioned before, over and over, like we're all people, we're all human. There's so much out there that I don't know. That's why I lean on my consultants and my community. It's not possible to know everything, like
Yeah,
it's just not.
I love that. So where can listeners find you if they want to connect with you and learn more?
Yeah. So my Instagram handle is Ed Coach Network. My website is edcoachnetwork.com. And you can even just shoot me an email, info@edcoachnetwork.com. Very straightforward.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Karen, for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Lauren.
Yeah, and I hope to connect with you in the future soon.
Yeah, it's always nice to talk to you, Lauren.
If you want to connect with Karen and learn more, get in touch with her, or work with her and her team, you can find her contact information through the description below. Thanks so much for being here, you guys. I will see you in the next video.